Rajuili. I'm the former WBF International Super Featherweight Champion and the former WBF All Africa Lightweight Champion. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Talking in Fight, Ringside Talk Show with your host, David Rajuili. Today we've got a special guest for you guys, a Hall of Famer. He has 49 fights, 21 knockouts, 1 losses, and 3 draws. He was also known as the Mincing Machine, also known as the Road Warrior, the one and only Hall of Famer, Mr. Brian Mitchell. Stay tuned. We're going to have him in studio this evening. Thank you. Mr. Brian Mitchell, Uncle Brian, how might I call you? How are you doing, sir?
I'm fine, you David Rajuili. Hey, my friend.
Very good, thank you. And thank you for taking out your time and being on my talk show today. Mr. Brian,
My pleasure.
I'll call you Uncle Brian because I know you. Uncle Brian, would you please just let the fans who you are, tell them a little bit about, who you are and your fight record and the titles that you've held.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I think I am your uncle because you were such good friends with all my children, with Brian and Nathan and Candace. My name is Brian Mitchell. I'm a 14-time undefeated WBA and IBF champion of the world, and South Africa's only Hall of Fame inductee.
Yes, Uncle Brian, also known you as the Mincing Machine and the great name, the Road Warrior. Uncle Brian, even just tell the fans, not that I know this, but you kind of started my boxing career. I remember as a little kid, I was 8 years old, watching Blow by Blow with my mom, and there was a documentary, actually, Blow by Blow, called The Road Warrior, and they were doing a short documentary on Brian Mitchell, and I remember that night very clearly. My mom actually called us to the room to watch this, and it took me many years to understand why she made me watch Brian Mitchell, but she was like,
and now you know.
Man, this man is a great example, with never giving up, the real fighting spirit. And as I say, it took me years to understand what was this all about. And going back to that, you were the only fighter in South Africa that during the apartheid times that defended this title, your world title, 12 times. Before we get into that, Uncle Brian, can you just tell the viewers a bit about your amateur career? I know it was also quite an exciting one, and when you turned pro in the 1980s.
Yes, well, David, firstly, thank you for the compliments. I'm glad I could be inspirational to you when you were 8 years old. It was. I started boxing when I was 9 years old at the Alice Park Boxing Club. I grew up in Troyville, and then my mom moved to Malvern. And I had most of my fights over a 10-year period. I had 110 amateur fights at the Malvern Club. I had a fairly decent record. I won 100 of them.
Yes.
I lost 10. I thought I'd won those 10, but the judges didn't think so. It was. I grew up in the tough streets, the back streets of Malvern, and I became a professional boxer at the age of 19 in 1981.
Yes, sir. Yes, I've read a lot about your story, Uncle Brian, and I see that even your late father was a boxer. Was that maybe your inspiration growing up as a young lad?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
yeah, David, I think absolutely. I think, everybody would like to say that their father is their hero, but you want your father to be a hero for something that he achieved in life. And especially me being a fanatical sportsman and fanatical boxer, my dad was a South African bantamweight boxing champion, professional champion, and as a professional boxing champion, how tough boxing is. And my dad, in his 3rd professional fight, won the South African title back in 1962 when I was just a year old. So my dad was my hero, my dad was my inspiration, and I'm glad that I could go on and be a champion like my dad was. And I never dreamt, my wildest dreams weren't that I was going to overtake my dad and become a world champion and become South Africa's best champion. But yeah, I think I made my dad very proud. So my dad was my inspiration.
Oh, that's a very nice thing to hear, Uncle Brian. And yeah, uh, I guess your dad being your inspiration, you went on to inspire many people like myself and young
Thank you.
people out there. Uncle Brian, you also say you grew up in Malvern. In those times, I know you were in the boxing in the hard times of South Africa, was going through a lot of apartheid days. Can you just tell your fans around the world, like, what kind of upbringing you had? Um, you even said, out of the rough streets and stuff. Would you let us know how it was growing up as a young teenager, as a young lad, having to
Yeah,
follow?
well, it was tough. I grew up in the back streets of Melbourne. We
Yes,
didn't have much finances in the house. The only thing we knew was go to the boxing club and become a boxer. But yeah, I grew up in apartheid times, and obviously apartheid is an ugly thing. It's an ugly word. It's a terrible thing that happened in South Africa. But I must tell you, in boxing, there is no apartheid.
yes,
So me as a young fighter, I always boxed with coloured and black guys, and I fought in every township of South Africa. And I had black friends, black sparring partners, black trainers. So from the apartheid point of view, for me, there wasn't apartheid in boxing.
okay,
It didn't matter what color you were. When you put your hand in a glove, you were in there to fight. You were on your own. So, and unfortunately, apartheid is an ugly thing. But for me, it wasn't in boxing.
okay. Very, very nice, Uncle Brian. And did you ever face any challenges? Like, I think I was reading your one book, one of my favorite books you signed for me. Uh, you always, as you just said now, going into the townships and fighting. Did
Mm.
you ever find that challenging as a white boxer going into the township?
Yes, David, it was very challenging because you can imagine me as a young 20-year-old professional boxer going into the townships in the height of apartheid when we weren't fighting in the townships, the blacks weren't fighting in our areas. It was tough for a little white kid to go into the township. But that's why I said for me, there was no apartheid in boxing because I went into Soweto and I fought the best guys. They were the best black guys and I beat them. And eventually I'd become the people's champion. So
Yes,
the Soweto boxing promoters would import guys from Free State, from the Vaal Triangle, from wherever it was, to fight me in a township, for me to fight a black guy in the township. And my supporters in Soweto were the black people, the black promoters,
yes,
and the black people. So that was amazing for me. I think I kind of turned it around in
yes,
boxing, the whole apartheid thing. I just turned it on its head. That this little white kid went into a township and he was being supported by the
but
blacks.
the black people, yes,
So yeah, for me there was never apartheid in boxing, but it was very tough. I went to England to fight Jim McDonald, and there were anti-apartheid demonstrators there throwing me with empty beer mugs, calling me a white racist, and something I never was. But I
yeah.
went out there and I proved that I'd fought everybody in every township and everywhere in the world, and just went out there to fight for my country.
Yes, and I think this was one of the contributes, or you could say one of the key things my mom was teaching me when I was watching her as a young lad is never giving up and fighting
Yes.
for what you believe in. I think those were one of the characteristics that my mom was trying to show. Uncle Brian, with your pro career. Uh, I know you've had 49 fights, 45 wins, three of those you draw and one loss. Very interesting. Uh, with your one loss, you fought a very great boxer at that time, uh, Jacob Moroccan.
Jacob Maraki.
Yes, and he's one fighter that you fought four times.
Yes.
You, yes. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I know it ended off a little bit fatal, but if you can just tell the
Yeah.
fans how did that happen?
No, no, sure. So Jacob Maraki is the most interesting character and fighter that I've ever fought in my career. He's the only guy to ever beat me, and I thought I'd won the fight, but I didn't get the decision. The
Yes,
judges gave it to Jacob Maraki. He defended his Transvaal title. Then he fought the South African champion, Chris Whiteboy. Chris Whiteboy beat him. Then I went above Jacob Meraki and I challenged Chris Whiteboy and I knocked out Chris Whiteboy, who'd beaten Meraki. So I
Yes.
beat the guy that beat me. And then Meraki challenged me for the South African title and I beat him 3 times after that. But
Yes.
unfortunately, he died in the ring at Sun City in our fourth and final fight. Yeah, it was as much as my career has been wonderful and great, and I can talk about being the only South African in the International Boxing Hall of Fame. I'm one of the only South Africans that had a death in the ring. And Jacob Meraki was a friend, was a sparring partner. He was a fellow fighter that I looked up to, and the only guy to beat me. And so unfortunately, he died in the ring. So that was really the bottom side of my career, from the
Yes.
great things that I achieved, the great people that I met, like Nelson Mandela. To have a death in the ring was very sad.
And just touching on that, Uncle Brian, and I think this will be a nice thing to know is how did you pick yourself up from that, and how did you come back and to, after something like that, still carry on to have such an amazing career? You would think
Thank,
um, going through that, having not having lost a friend, lost a sparring
mm,
partner,
mm.
could for some people hold you back. You wouldn't come back the same. But it looks like with you, Uncle Brian, you came back stronger. You came back. How did you get that right?
Yeah, thanks, David. Well, if I look back in my career now, I can't even begin to imagine how it's strong my mind must have been as a
Yeah.
24-year-old, because I
Yes.
was 24 years old and this absolute major tragedy had happened in my life. I decided to retire, in fact. I said to my
Yes.
family, I don't want to fight anymore. I mean, there's a death in the ring. That's not why I became a professional boxer. And my family supported my retirement, but Sun International and my promoters and everybody that believed in me said, but you're number 2 in the world. You've got to go on and fight for the world title. And, and Jacob Meraki's mother was very instrumental. She phoned me and she said she was praying for me, and that she was it was unbelievable. She said to me that her son died doing what he loved, and he died against me, and I've got to go on to fight for the world title. So it was incredible to come from the man's mother. And when I
Yes.
won the world title a year and a half later, the first thing I did when I got the mic is I dedicated the win to the late Jacob Meraki. But in
Yes.
finishing answering your question, it was very tough. You can imagine. I mean, nobody wants that in boxing. But people believed in me. My promoters believed in me. Meraki's mother believed in me.
Yes.
And if I look back in life now, it was meant to be, because a year and a half later, I was South Africa's world champion. And I
Yes.
think if it was the other way around, if I had died in the ring, I would have wanted Jacob Meraki to go on and win a world title.
Yes.
So that's how passive and strong we are in the sport of boxing. There's absolutely no racism in boxing. It's
Yes.
it's one-on-one. We're all friends. We're all family. As you
Yes.
being a youngster that grew up following me, friends of my children. There isn't racism in boxing. We're
Yeah.
friends. We're family. We love each other. We're in the same game.
Yes, that's amazing, Uncle Brian, and it's amazing to hear how you came
Thanks.
back and hearing from the mom, to speak to you like that.
Yes,
You touched
yes.
on something now, your first world title. Uh, I'm sure that was amazing. I know it was in September. You fought Alfonso Layne from Panama.
Alfredo Layne from Panama.
Yes, Alfredo Layne from Panama. Can you tell the viewers about that experience? As you said, also, you dedicated it to Jacob
Yes.
Raku.
Yeah. Well, David, it
Afterwards,
was
how did that, from going into South African champion, going into the world stage of boxing, how was that? And I know
thank you.
from there your career just went straight to the top.
Yeah, well, I was a young South African champion. I was 25 years old, but I'd already defended my title 8 times, and I felt I was ready to win a world title. The international media and even the South African media didn't believe that I was ready to win a world title. It was very tough. Alfredo Layne had just knocked out Wilfredo Gomez. Gomez was an international legend that's also in the Hall of Fame. And Alfredo Layne wasn't supposed to beat Gomez, but he knocked Gomez out. And I wasn't supposed to beat Alfredo Layne. So They got Alfredo Layne his first defense of the WBA world title, scheduled for 15 rounds back in 27 September 1986. And I got in that ring and I said, I'm not leaving that ring without the world title. I'm getting in there no matter what happens. If I have to die in the ring, so be it. I want to be the world champion. And I knocked out Alfredo Layne in the 10th round in September of 86 to become South Africa's only world champion. And it was wonderful. There were 6,000 people at the Super Bowl supporting me. But then the sad news, politics, once again, the ugly head of politics, stuck itself out again in South Africa. As we know, the political situation has never been great. And the WBA decided, because of apartheid and because of sanctions, they would ban South Africa from competing in world title fights. So yeah, I was this little WBA champion, newly won champion, my whole life on the line for 25 years to be the best in the world. You know what it's like to be a fighter. And now I've become the best in the world and I can't fight in my own country. I was devastated. So I had the death of Jacob Maraki, and now I had the WBA saying I can't fight in my own country. I thought, like, what's going on in my life? Why does this have to happen to me? But then, fortunately, they allowed me the WBA. The good news was I could keep the title, but I would have to defend out the country. So that was good enough news for me, as long as I could stay world champion. I went to Puerto Rico, I went to Panama, I went to France, I went to Spain, I went to Italy 6 times, I went to America to fight Tony Lopez. And yeah, I had 13 world titles fights on the road. I never expected to have so many wins. The journey was just unbelievable.
Yes, and you went on and you defended all those titles outside your country, and I think that's what you got the alias name, the Road Warrior.
Thank you. Yeah, and I do believe that today that's the reason I'm in the International Boxing Hall of Fame, because I don't believe any fighters had to do that outside of the country.
Yes, especially without your home fans, and that alone must have been difficult. Always defending in the back garden, always being the away corner, and even though you're champion, you are the away corner because you're in somebody else's back garden, and just putting it all on the line and always coming out victorious. I'm sure there was many ups and downs being away from family. I know your kids, Nathan and Brian, were born in the state, and Nathan, Brian, and Candace were born in the States because you were also always on the road, always fighting out from away from home. That must have been very, very, very difficult for you, Uncle Brian. As I know myself, like I'm training overseas, trying to find fights out here. It also gets difficult. You're away from family and friends. Can you just give us a little bit about your story with the difficult circumstances you went through around that time?
Yeah, well, David, like I said, it was very tough. I mean, I fought Jim McDonald in England, and the fight almost happened because the anti-apartheid demonstrators were out there picketing and throwing me with empty beer cans, and so the fight almost never happened. And I was putting my title on the line against an English guy in his country. Then I went to Italy, and the mafia, they jumped on me at one of the fights there, wanted to break down the ring, didn't want to see a South African fight. It was endless. So there was Puerto Rico with Joe Rivera. They tried to rob me against Joe Rivera in a 15-round fight because they wanted the title to stay in Puerto Rico. Then I went to Panama, and there was Rocky Fernandez, and the anti-apartheid demonstrators also nearly made the fight happen by picketing at the event, and the promoter took my passport away and postponed the fight. I had many, many bad issues that I suppose you can only read about in my book. And then, Tony Lopez, my last world title fight, I had 20,000 Mexican Americans booing me and shouting me down. And I just had my family in the corner, So I had the judges against me, the referees against me. I had the world against me, other than South Africa. But I was strong-minded, and I knew I was coming back to this country. And I kept South Africa's name flying.
Yes, that's amazing, Uncle Brian. It's actually amazing hearing. It's just you must have been. It's another kind of strong mind frame you must have had. Many people can crumble in such situations.
Yes.
Uncle Brian, talking about your world titles, which would you say is your greatest achievements in your world titles? Your greatest fights that you'll always remember and you always speak about?
Well, David, as you know, once again, as a professional fighter, every victory is great. So,
Yeah.
when you first get in an amateur boxing fight when I was 9 years old, it's great to win. When you become a professional and you take your vest off and you win a professional title, is great. But I think in answering your question properly, winning the world title on the 27th of September 1986 in South Africa at Sun City in front of my own people, winning the world title for the first time was absolutely amazing.
Okay.
And then 5 years later, beating Tony Lopez in Sacramento for the IBF title was mind-boggling.
Yes.
And then all my defenses in between, in all the
Perfect.
countries, it was, you know what it's like,
Yes.
winning every fight is so special. So winning my WBA title and defending it 12 times and then winning the
Mm.
IBF title against Tony Lopez was all very special.
That's amazing, Uncle Brian. And with that journey, um, yeah, you got inducted into the International Hall of Fame, the first South African to actually get inducted. That's
Yes,
actually
thank you.
congratulations. How,
Thank
when
you.
you got that call, or when, I know one thing, many boxers out there in the world, even you
Yes,
look right now, there's Canelo's, there's the Oscar Valdez, and some of those boxers will never actually, they can be as great as they are, they'll never get inducted into the Hall of Fame. It's something
yes.
special, fighter. It's an honor. What happened? How did it, like, okay, with the defenses and everything, what happened that time when you got that call? What was the feeling? Because I think
Uh,
this
uh,
is one of the greatest achievements as well as a fighter that you can receive it, It's like a
Thanks,
Oscar.
David. No, it was, thank you. It was mind-boggling. I mean, I was actually playing golf at Glen Vista, which I still live down the road from, and it was in 2009, so that's like 12 years ago.
Yes.
And I got a call from an American guy, Ed Brophy, telling me that they wanted to induct me into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. I thought he was joking. I thought it's just some prankster, playing a prank on me, phoning me with an American accent.
Yeah.
And I phoned Rodney
It's,
Berman and I said, this guy, Ed Brophy, wants to induct me into the Hall of Fame. And he said, that's great. I gave him your number. And, when it kicked in that I was actually being inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame, it's the ultimate prize any prize fighter, any professional fighter can achieve. So it was bigger than winning any world title. To be inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame with Sugar Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler, Muhammad Ali, the list goes on and on, all the greats. I'm fortunate to be on the wall with those guys.
yes, yes. It's for me that's the ultimate prize as a fighter. As I
Yes,
say, some of the great fighters we watch today, they can, as great as they are, some of them won't make it to that wall. So it is an honor to be on that wall.
yes,
Um,
thank you.
so yeah. Can you let the fans and the people know what Brian Mitchell gets up to in the 2021 these days?
2021.
You know,
After
yes,
after
you're managing
lockdown,
fighters, you're playing some golf. What
yeah,
did the
thanks,
retired uh, Brian Mitchell getting
thanks,
up to?
David. Yeah, I think lockdown was terrible. This whole COVID-19 was terrible for everybody. I trained a lot at home. I carried on doing my boxing just to stay sane. I was punching the bag and I was running up and down the stairs at my house during COVID. But yeah, now we kind of back in the swing of things. I manage a lot of fighters. I've opened a new boxing gym in Edenvale, and I do a lot of guest speaking at companies, motivational talking. I talk at golf days and sell memorabilia with all the famous people I've been with, like Nelson Mandela, Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali. So that's kind of what I do to stay busy. I commentate for Supersport, the big
Yes,
network in South Africa, and I'm the spokesperson for Golden Gloves, which is the biggest boxing promoting company in Africa.
yes.
And I'm a boxing manager, and I'm a golfer. Yeah,
Yes, yes. Oh, that's very nice, Uncle Brian. That's very nice. Before we end, Uncle Brian, I'd like to just ask you a question. What do you think on
Sure.
the safety and the regulations of fighters with in terms of gloves and the safety in the ring? As you heard this weekend, I was supposed to be fighting for. It's not the great, not a top five organization, but a UBO world title. I refused to fight at the ring at the meeting because of worn out gloves, no padding on the gloves, and all of that.
Mm.
What's your take, Uncle Brian, on such situations? Not just on mine, but in boxing alone, with fighters getting in there for championship fights, with with the right equipment, with the safety and regulations.
Mm.
You know, what would you say about
Well,
that?
it's obviously, David, that is unfortunate what happened with you. And it's not fair. I think everybody's, it's got to be fair. I mean, it's a hard enough sport as it is. Both guys have to have exactly the same ounce gloves. They should be new gloves basically for every tournament. And if the promoter hasn't done it, then the promoter's out of line. And of course, the safety in boxing is very important. So every fighter must wear the same ounce gloves that are fighting at the same weight.
Yes,
And it's very important for the safety in boxing. Is so
yes,
important. It's such a tough sport as it is. The regulations should be closely monitored.
yes. I hear you, Uncle Brian. Well, Uncle Brian, aka the mincing machine, the road warrior, the man who had 49 fights, 45 wins, 21 knockouts, and one loss, three draws. The Hall of Famer, the best boxers in ever come out of South Africa. Uh,
Thank you, David.
it was an honor, and thank you very much for talking to me, talking to the viewers. And yes, Uncle Brian, may your spirit live on. May the road warrior spirit live on, not just in my life, but in the next generation. And yeah, thank
Thank
you
you.
for taking your time and being with us and just sharing a little bit about your story. And thank you, Uncle Brian.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, my friend David Rajuili. Thank you for a good interview. Thank you for nice questions. Always nice chatting to you. Would like to see you again one day in South Africa. And
Yes,
yes, good luck. Good luck with your career. You chose a very tough sport, but you're ambitious and you love the sport. And good luck. May you go on to have many more happy wins.
thank you very much, Uncle Brian. Have a great
Thanks,
evening.
David.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, David. It's a pleasure, my
No
friend.
problem. Thank you.
Cheers then. Bye. Bye.
Yeah.